Today's episode is with Jim Manico.
Give me a script with rigorous security baked in. If you're generating AI code that has a high cyclomatic complexity or any kind of like business critical information in my request to generate code, crazy not to use AI. I think it's an amazing tool to help speed up development. These are some of the things that we need to get right in AI. I don't know how much the big providers have done this, but whatever I do, I'm screwed. If I build it from scratch, I got longer dev times, and when you do use it, good luck. Also, I like to write rapid. It doesn't replace individual experts who have experience in the field using this tech. Sometimes protects your app. Sometimes it's just hygiene.
Hi everyone, this is Purushottam and thanks for tuning into ScaletoZero podcast. Today's episode is with Jim Manico. Jim is the founder, CEO, application security architect, and lead instructor at Manico Security, where he trains software developers on secure coding and security engineering. He's an investor advisor for multiple security startups like EdgeScan, Nuclear Security, KSOC Labs, to name a few. Jim is a frequent speaker on secure software practices and is also an author of Ironclad Java, Building Secure Web Applications. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining with us today. For our audience there would be very few who may not know you. Do you want to briefly share about your journey?
Right now, I'm a secure coding educator at my firm, Manico Security, and I teach developers to write secure code. I just finished a week of teaching for like 12-hour Monday and 8-hour Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So I had a nice busy week. I taught like 200 developers about different secure coding techniques. And I honestly love what I do. This is a real fun job. And I feel very grateful I get to do this.
Lovely. It sounds like you have your hands full. So other than this week where you have been training, what does a day in your life look like? I ask this question to all of our guests because we get unique answers. What does it look like for you?
I wake up and I clean my house. I usually keep my house clean. So I wake up and I like get up, do dishes, whatever it's not clean, I get my house in a clean state. That's just a few minutes to wake me up. I have coffee. That's it. Clean up, coffee, wake up for a little while. And then I clean up my email. And if I don't have class, I go to a morning yoga class over at Dance Yogis down by where I live. So I go to yoga every day, sometimes twice a day if I can schedule it in. And if I'm training, I'm usually starting early and I'm teaching a class like I did 7 a.m. to 3 o'clock today, or 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. for India companies, or like 9 to 5 for California companies. And I'm teaching during the day. And I fit in a morning or evening yoga class in every day of my life that I possibly can, or I practice on my own out in my deck. And then there's a hot spring nearby. If I have the day off, or if I have time at the evening, I'll go to the hot spring. I'll hang out with friends. I go dancing a lot. There's a static dance in my area in California, and I go dancing like 2 or 3 times a week. Like Sunday, I'm going to Fusion, a partner dance training. And and I travel a lot. Like some of my customers want me to travel, or sometimes I just have a week off. In my business, I'll have like super 2 weeks of training and I'll have like a half a week off. I was going on a little trip. Like I'm going to Vietnam in 2 weeks just for the fun of it. If you're from Vietnam and you want me to give you a secure coding talk in like 2 weeks, I'd love to find someone who wants it. But I live a good life. I feel very fortunate and grateful for the life that I live. I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah, and sounds fun.
I'm single right now, ladies. I'm single. So,
and sounds fun as well. Like you help developers get better at security, right? Which is one of the core motto of our podcast as well. So let's get into it. So today we are going to talk about application security. Before we get into the application part, right? Like today we all live in the age of GenAI. Like everybody talks about GenAI. When it comes to developers, they use many tools like GitHub Copilot or AWS Code Whisperer, and there are a few others as well, to generate code and security recommendations. And these recommendations come from models which were trained based on millions of lines of open source code, right? So what's your confidence score on these code recommendations?
Well, it depends on what you ask for. If you say, give me a script to do something, you're going to get more of a half-ass answer. But if you say, give me a script with rigorous security baked in, guess what? You're going to get a way better, secure, more secure piece of code. So just got to be really specific, really specific. The more the merrier about what you're asking for. And don't trust any code from AI. First of all, there could be licensing problems with AI generated code. That's still not decided yet. But besides that, whatever code you generate from AI should go through a DevOps lifecycle, static analysis, third party library scanning, maybe even a dynamic scanner, and go through like code and security. And the more security critical that code is that you're generating, the more it should go through deeper review. At the very least, I'd run like a semgrep or a bear or some kind of static analysis engine and fix those security bugs. I'd also look at things like the complexity of the code. Like I think it's called cyclomatic complexity that some code engines will tell you. If you're generating AI code that has a high cyclomatic complexity, I worry about that. I usually want something that's a bit lower. So I would just use the standard code metric review tools that we have today in a DevOps pipeline before I let any code, especially AI code, go live.
So there are two things that I could take out of it, right? One is like it often misses the context of what you are trying to do. If you ask for a very pointed question, you might get a maybe good answer.
You get a
And the
better answer.
second, yeah,
Yeah.
and the second thing which is very important in your answer was that you cannot just trust whatever I got from let's say the Gen AI tools and then use it for production, right? You still should go take them through your DevSecOps cycle, like trust but verify, right? That's one of the things that I could read from what you said. So what when it comes to the context, right, often you have to there was some news that some developers feed in some of the business critical information as part of the teaching to the Gen AI tools, right? How would you suggest the developers keep a balance of that when they are providing context to these tools?
I just wouldn't put any kind of sensitive data or any kind of like business critical information in my request to generate code. I would ask for more generic. I'd use AI more for like general utility stuff. If I'm getting into custom business logic, I'm going to use a lot less AI. Even though it's compelling, I can get my requirements really crisp and throw it into AI and say, give me X code from this framework with high security and a low cyclomatic complexity, and I'll get it. And it's really interesting. So just, you know what? It depends on what I was building. In some cases, I just throw my requirements in to ChatGPT and see what comes out and be okay with it. If it was a lot more sensitive of what I was doing was kind of some magic, the more
Mm-hmm.
unique it is, the less AI is going to help anyways, and I'd probably be more private. But if I'm doing generic enterprise development or something more plain, I'd throw my requirements into ChatGPT and say, write me code that follows these requirements, that has high security, low cyclomatic complexity, and then review it carefully and security test it and do other kinds of automated analysis and review depending on how critical it was. But it's crazy not to use AI. I think it's an amazing tool to help speed up development. And it's
Right.
not a common opinion, but it's mine. I love it. I love AI.
Same here. I use it on a daily basis.
Me too.
One of the terms that you have used multiple times is cyclomatic complexity, right?
So high
I'm curious, what does?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, buddy. High cyclomatic complexity indicates a code base that's so complex it's hard to maintain, test, and understand. It's a red flag for functional bugs and vulnerabilities. So, if doing with security, you want to keep an
Mhm.
eye on this metric. High complexity almost always correlates with a higher chance of security issues. So, just in general, lower cyclomatic complexity is a more plain way to develop, less fancy BS. It's easier to maintain and secure.
Okay, makes sense. So when it comes to security for AI in general, right, it's categorized into few buckets, and on top of like traditional application security guidelines, there are like awareness and ownership aspects which come into picture. So when it comes to Gen AI related security, how do you think about data security, and what steps would you take to make sure the data that is being fed or what you are receiving is secure?
It's secure in the database of the AI engine, you mean?
Hmm.
That's hard. Like it's really advanced techniques to lock that stuff down. Like I would look at things like differential privacy where I can keep the data encrypted in the database, but still operate on that data in some way. So
Mm-hmm.
again, differential privacy type of engineering. And so again, it's a way of allowing me to compute on data in an AI data store. So here we go. So differential privacy, it's a mathematical framework for quantifying the privacy risk involved in the release of data. This is Cynthia Dwork's work. And so the core idea is to add a lot of noise to the data or query results in a way that the presence or absence of a single record doesn't significantly affect the outcome. So this is important because it's got data utility. It allows for the use of data in a way that's statistically significant but doesn't compromise individual privacy. And it helps you
Mm-hmm.
be compliant with things like GDPR. And so that's one of the answers for private-centric data. There's also different kinds of crypto out of IBM and others where I can operate on data and do computation of data even while it remains encrypted to keep
Mm-hmm.
that confidentiality of the data in place. So these are some of the things that we need to get right in AI. I don't know how much the big providers have done this, but
Mm-hmm.
strong access control and similar is important. And that's a quick answer, but it's at the high end of the solutions spectrum when building AI systems from scratch, especially.
Okay, that makes sense. So, on top of that, there is the code aspect as well, right? Where you might be using a framework, or you might be using something like LangChain, or you're using a vector database, something like that.
Yeah, that's
So,
horrible. No,
so
no, no.
you're prone to.
No, it sucks because you're going to pick up some third party library in the new space of AI, and now you're depending on it. And one of two things happens: there's a security bug, and you're forced to update, and all of
Mhm,
a sudden things break. So you have to go back and figure out what the hell just broke. And these are like big data libraries. Imagine that. Oh, we had a security bug, and it screws up your whole system, and you have no idea why. It's just using third party components in a bleeding edge industry is we need to, but you got to really vet which libraries you're going to use before you bet your company on it. Number one, and number two, you want to keep those componentry up to date and really hope that those open source developers have a good upgrade path. It's so just being judicious about what third party components you use is super important. And then again, maintaining them and updating them for security and functionality bugs over time. Good luck. I hate this topic. It's because whatever I do, I'm screwed. If I build it from scratch, I got longer dev times. And if I pick the wrong library and have to unwind that decision, it's painful, very
mhm.
painful.
And you are absolutely right, because that also means you are dependent on third-party developers, either open source or closed source, and that sort of brings you to the supply chain security again, right? So on top of what you just highlighted, right, like keeping up to date or maintaining some of the aspects which maybe are getting delayed or something like that, what other recommendations you have for a company which is adopting, let's say, some open source technology for Gen AI development?
I would say have a DevOps pipeline where I'm not allowed to issue a merge. Like I can PR, but you don't let me merge if I don't pass a software composition analysis tool that determines that none of the third party libraries I'm using has a security problem. That's the main thing, right? It's automate, defend, like things like Dependabot are helpful, things like Sneak and JFrog and MergeBase and all the other software composition analysis tools. SemGrep has a new third-party library scanner. So automation helps a lot here. But before you even get to that point, be really judicious about what library you're going to pick in the first place. And if you can get away with it, don't use it. If it's not that much dev time, don't use the library. I'd err on the side of writing my own code and only use a library when it's necessary. And when you do use it, good luck. Also, I like to write wrapper classes around my use of libraries when I can. Big frameworks, less so. But individual utility libraries, I'll write a wrapper around it. So I have to like change functionality. I don't have to change my whole code base. I'm just like modifying the innards of my wrapper so I can maybe swap out a function or block functions, whatever I need to do. Those are some of the things. And this sucks. Whatever you do, you're screwed. You write your own code too much, it's like longer dev times, but at least the code is scannable by code scanning tools.
Mhm.
And if you use less, and if you use too many libraries, you have the update burden. You can speed initial development. You're going to pay for that during the update cycle. So really, I err on the side of using less third-party libraries writing a wrapper around the libraries, scanning the crap out of them and keeping them as up to date as I can, about a month behind the bleeding edge. What I do.
Mhm. And that's one of the sort of risk rewards of working in a bleeding edge technology, right? You have
Yeah.
the risk of using something which is not 100% stable. At the same time, you gain the rewards when you build something out of it. So I have a follow-up question on that. Like OWASP has put together a guide for AI security. So how, like according to you, how does OWASP top 10 or CWE top 25 apply to Gen AI security?
There's a specific OWASP top 10. It's the OWASP top 10 for LLM, for
Mm-hmm.
large language models. And I think that's outstanding. It's a really good document, and it helped educate me on AI security. So the OWASP top 10 in general, not so much, but the actual OWASP top 10 for LLM applications version 1.0.1 came out August 26th, like a little more than a month ago. And it's very well done. This is written by Steve Wilson. Virtual Steve on Twitter is the author of this. Great job, Virtual Steve. You rock. These are things like prompt injection, insecure output handling, training data poisoning, model denial of service, supply chain vuln, sensitive information disclosure, insecure plugin design, excessive agency, over reliance, and model theft. This is a great place to start when it comes to developing secure AI systems. Good job, Steve. Good job, Virtual Steve. I'm going to follow him on Twitter right now.
Yeah, so what we'll do is when we publish this episode, we'll tag him as well and also the OWASP top 10 for LLMs so that our audience can get benefit out of it. And one of the things that you highlighted earlier was the wrapper, right? On top of, let's say, you are using open source library. That's a very good software engineering practice in general. It's doesn't have to be only for security, right? Even for software engineering, it's a good
So
recommendation.
that has saved me so many times. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
yeah, absolutely.
I did it at the UI level when I was doing like Java client side development for the original
Mm-hmm.
like desktop Java apps, and I would use a tree structure, a really complicated UI widget, and I just wrapped the whole thing. It took me a lot of time, and I literally swapped it out with a new widget, and it just worked, and it was like freaking
Yeah.
magic. So I love wrapping third party stuff in even a thin wrapper. It works well.
Makes sense. Like so far we have discussed that a code is getting generated from, let's say, Chat GPT or Bard or something like that. You're using it, and there are like pros and cons to it. What do you think about using generative AI for building better software architecture, like secure architecture, on top of not just the code, but building secure architecture? What's your take on that?
Give me an example question that you would ask AI. Secure architecture is such a loaded topic. Give me a more specific example.
Sure. Let's say you are um, creating an application which stores data in a S3 bucket as a temporary placeholder to, let's say, generate thumbnails or something like that. How do I build a secure architecture there? I'm trying to deploy it as a Lambda, let's say.
So build me a secure architecture for an AWS app that
Hmm.
uses an S3 bucket to save uploaded files, right?
Hmm.
So build me a very so I'm going to go very super secure architecture for an AWS app. And I'm using ChatGPT 4 with PDF readers and web crawlers. And so
Hmm.
let's see. So they're saying, designing a super secure architecture for AWS app. Use that three bucket. They're saying, ready? Use front end, React, Angular, or Vue. Those are my three
Hmm.
choices for user interface frameworks today. Back end, RESTful API built with Java, Python, or Node. Database, AWS, RDS, MySQL, Postgres, or Aurora. File storage, S3, VPC. So they're saying just architectural notes, things like VPC isolation, security groups, NACLs, and VPN for the network rate. S3 bucket enables server-side encryption in AWS KMS. Enables server-side encryption in the S3 bucket with the AWS KMS key system, and
Hmm.
HTTPS everywhere using bucket policies. Use IAM roles and policies to grant less brief clears access. From a very high level, this is a great place to start. And they're giving me
Hmm.
everything from like backup, CIDC, and then I can go in and say, "Hey, expand." So I don't understand something. So expand in super detail on the VPC isolation stuff. I always talk about mutual TLS, and some people tell me that the VPC isolation is can be used in place of mutual TLS. I kind of debate it. So now I'm getting like VPC creation in steps for AWS. I got to vet a lot of this. If it's not in my
Yeah, yeah.
expertise, I got to vet this. But this is pretty outstanding, right? The
Hmm.
result that's spitting out in just a matter of a few minutes is a good starting point to map out other things I need to research in a more detailed way. So I'll say yes. I'll say yes.
Okay. So it makes sense that you feed in very detailed requirements in a way to ChatGPT or Bard, and you get the output. You use that as a starting point, and then you dig deeper as you work in individual areas in a way, right?
Yeah, bring
Uh,
it. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, and I really liked how you stressed on very secure uh,
Yeah, it's better than
in the prompt,
secure.
right?
Very secure. And I can even try like other descriptive words. And like I can even say, hey, make it more simple. Give me the same
Hmm.
architecture, ultra secure, but lower the cyclomatic complexity or any kind of make it more simple. And they'll give me even a more straightforward path. We got
Hmm.
EC2 instances. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good starting place. But again, it doesn't replace individual experts who have experience in the field using this tech. So I can build the initial build out of this and then
Hmm.
bring in AWS architects, expensive, to vet what I'm doing, see what I'm missing. You know?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So let's say I got the recommendation, I started writing code now. So let's go into some of the secure coding practices, right?
All right.
Even from, let's say, OWASP recommendation.
I'm ready.
So one of the key ones is like input sanitization or validation. When you are, let's say, you have an input for users, let's say username password, user is inputting on the screen. What's the Why should I care? Like, users will always enter valid values, right?
No. Well, input validation, keep in mind though, even valid data can cause injection. Injection, or input validation sometimes protects your app. Sometimes it's just hygiene because I can
Hmm.
have an email address that has a SQL injection payload and is still dangerous. So I want to validate data. That's good. And restrict data to the least amount of characters and patterns possible. Allow
Hmm.
list validation. Here's what good data is, reject everything else. But if I'm going to use that data in a parser, like a database parser, SQL, I'm going to use a parameterized query. If I'm going to use that data in, say, like an LDAP command, I'm going to strictly validate that data to not include certain LDAP dangerous characters. Or if I'm going to use that data in a web page, I'm going to either validate, sanitize, or escape the data based on what I need to do with it in a web page. So validate is not security. It's your hygiene layer. Security happens when you use the data safely. So even if that data has an attack, it's not going to hurt the use of that
Okay.
data.
That's a very good way of explaining, right? Like, you have to be very careful about SQL injection. So you should take parameterization and others into you have to keep them in mind. So another question, follow-up question to that is, what mistakes have you seen developers do when they are, let's say, implementing these validations? Or let's say if they are storing any sensitive data, let's say they capture credit card information or SSN information or PII information. What mistakes do are developers doing even today?
Validation is really the problem, right? The problem's not validation. The problem's typically they're not parameterizing their query, or they're storing sensitive data that they don't need to be storing, or
Hmm.
they're not encrypting things like a bank account in the database. It's ultra sensitive data, or they're not even classifying their data, or they're not using HTTPS, or
Hmm.
they have weak password policy or weak access control. I look at the ASVS standard, Application Security Verification Standard. There's like
Hmm.
300 requirements around secure development. A lot can go wrong. You misconfigured XML parser using a very old library to parse JSON that has serialization problems. The list goes on and on. About 300 requirements in the ASVS standard.
Okay. Uh, Taking it to the next level, which is, let's say you have done the input validation and all, but there can always be some man in the middle attack or somebody trying to replay a request or something like that. How do you handle those? Like, do security headers play a role in web application security or content security policies for a web application? What's your thought on those areas?
Yeah, I definitely like implementing content security policy. I like a non-space policy, so I specifically notch each script that's okay, so everything else is not going to run. I like
Mm-hmm,
XSS defense. I still want you to write securely, use Angular or React, and understand where the frameworks aren't going to help you and where they do help you, and learn how to use React and Angular securely.
mm-hmm.
And on top of that, I love content security policy. It's a way to stop cross-site scripting in most of the browsers that we use today in a really powerful way. So I love these technologies. I tend to use a nonce-based content security policy with the strict dynamic call to make sure the dependencies load automatically. It's a nice way to use CSP. I love it.
And some of the frameworks, like React or Ruby on Rails, they come inbuilt with non-spaced secure transactions already, right? Do developers have to explicitly do that, you feel, or that's part of the framework? Maybe they just need to enable a flag or add a plugin or something like that.
Well, with does React natively, so you can enable CSP in React in a couple different ways. Let
Mm-hmm,
me see. Yeah, you can use content security policy with React. There's a couple guides out there to explain how to do it. But you also should be using React securely, right? If you're going to use the dangerously set inner HTML function of React or the
mm-hmm,
bypass security HTML in Angular, you're disabling those framework security. And you should use like
mm-hmm,
an HTML sanitizer. Like in Angular, there's a built-in sanitizer, or React, you want to use dangerously set inner HTML with a library called DOM Purify. So I would use a combination of enabling CSP, but also use these frameworks securely in the first place, and be careful of the times where you disable the framework security feature, like disabling escaping, or if you're allowing an untrusted URL to be added
mm-hmm.
to an image tag, you should block. You should only allow the HTTPS protocol and don't allow the JavaScript or data protocols. So especially React, it does require some specialized knowledge. Angular, a little bit less so. Angular has a little bit better security baked in, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really strict how you need to use it. So use CSP, integrate it with your framework, and use your framework in a secure fashion. These are topics I teach in my own security course as a teacher.
Okay. Yeah, and I like how you stressed on the fact that use CSPs, but at the same time use React in a secure way.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, go through some of the security basics. Don't get them wrong in a way, right? When you are, no matter which framework you pick, but at least you need to do that exercise with your team, let's say, before you start jump into writing code in a framework. um, one last question that I have is, often, like, when it comes to application development, there is, let's say, a sign in login capability, right? And often organizations try to incorporate two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. What are some of the critical factors one should keep in mind when like building that capability?
The NIST standard for identity, special publication 863, says you really want to discourage SMS. It's the least secure multi-factor, but it's better than no multi-factor alone. So NIST says if you have sensitive data, go ahead and implement SMS, but make that a secondary choice and make a more secure option be the first choice, like app-based multi-factor with some kind of mobile app or something other than SMS that's stronger. And so at level 3, when you have like infrastructure level security, they recommend like a hardware token, like a YubiKey or similar. So
Mhm.
that's my only advice there, is use the right kind of
Something
multi.
like this, right?
Yeah, exactly. Use the right kind of multi-factor for the level of risk you can tolerate with the kind of app you're doing. So if it's like sensitive data, I'd use SMS and a mobile authenticator option for your users. If it's like your critical infrastructure of your company, I'd be using YubiKeys as the main authentication factor.
Okay. That's a great advice. Um, Thank you for answering the security questions. Thanks, Jim, for the insightful conversation. Here are a few important points which stood out for me. The first one is, when it comes to code generation using GenAI tools, trust but verify. Always run the code generated by these tools through your DevSecOps pipelines. for static scan and dynamic scan. The second part is during prompt engineering, stay away from feeding any sensitive information to these tools. And as a best practice, always ask for low cyclomatic complexity recommendations. It's because it's simpler and easier to maintain. The third one is on top of adding security capabilities, when using any framework like React or Angular or Ruby on Rails, use them securely and apply application security best practices on top of it, like OWASP top 10 recommendations or CWE 25 recommendations. Thank you. Now we jump into the next section, which is around rating security practices. So the way it works is I'll share a practice, and you need to rate from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. So let's start with the first one. So provide training and awareness programs to employees to help them identify and respond to potential security threats.
My company is named Manicode Security, and I focus on secure coding trading. So I picked that one to self-serve my own interests, right? So yeah, hire me to to teach your developers how to write secure code. That's the most important thing in my life. Now, I'm not sure it's most important for your program, but that's what I do for a living. And it's something I really enjoy. Again, I'm Jim at manicode.com or manicode.com. That's what I do for a living. I teach developers to write secure code. So it's number
Awesome.
one.
Yeah. So the next one is DevOps practices are needed to move fast and to deploy code to
Yeah.
production, right? Security is not the most important sometimes, is seen as not the most important. What's your rating on that
I
philosophy?
I think the ability to push live fast lets you reduce the exposure windows of bugs. If I push out a bug and my post deployment scanner said there's a bug live, well, I can fix it just as fast. So as
Hmm.
long as I have a disciplined DevOps lifecycle where I have a relatively clean code base that's already scanning clean, I only stop the developer from merging if we pick up a new bug that they just wrote, and I have the full CI infrastructure building, infrastructure scanners, code scanners, all in line in a mature DevOps pipeline, then going live fast, I think for a lot of code is a good idea. For some code like my authentication code or a credit card repository, I may require manual review. But for a lot of
Hmm.
standard enterprise code, I think going live fast, it helps you compete in the market and lets you fix bugs as fast as you can write them to reduce exposure windows. I like it. Absolutely.
Okay. Makes sense. Let's go to the last one, which is continuous integration is a must
Yeah.
for DevOps practices.
Yeah. You can't
Security architecture review should be part of it. What's your take on that?
well, you can't do CD without CI. CI is the medicine that's needed to do CD. So I need to have good continuous integration, security testing, code functionality testing, Selenium, unit tests around my most sensitive features, a really robust automated security and functionality testing framework.
Hmm.
That's the price you pay. And then infrastructure construction, Docker buildings, Docker security scanning, all that stuff, hot swap live deployment. And that's the medicine that allows you to do CD in a powerful way. I like it. But you want to do CI with all this, it's non trivial to set this up. One of the companies I advise is called Defect Dojo, right? They
Hmm.
have an open source DEFECTDOJO. This is an open source DevOps pipeline. That's not a bad way to get started. Integrate with GitHub and everything. So this is like
So it's funny that you mentioned Defect Dojo. Matt from Defect Dojo was in our podcast 2 weeks ago. We'll be publishing that episode in 2 weeks.
oh nice.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like it folks should check it out.
I'm one of his advisory. I'm on his advisory board, and I'm on his board because I believe in what he's doing. He's awesome. So
Yeah, yeah.
defectdojo.com is a good starting place for DevOps.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great way to end the episode. But before we end the recording, I have one last question, which is: do you have one recommended reading, like a blog or a book or a podcast, which you would like to share with our audience?
Oh, okay. Some kind of blog or some kind of
or
book.
book or podcast, any one that you would recommend.
I'm gonna do a little search on this. So I just read. I just do a lot of. You know what I do? I go and set up a bunch of Google alerts on all the security topics I care about, and I get
Hmm.
curated list of articles every day from all kinds of different sources. So I
Okay.
recommend using. I recommend using sort by newest arrivals here. Okay. So I'm looking at the latest books to show up in secure coding for software engineers by James Ma. Just came out September, like a few days ago. What's this? What language is this? This is a guide to building resilient and trusted software systems over the web. Just came out from James Ma, but it came out like a week ago. Michael Murray, I know secure Python coding fundamentals. So I went to Amazon, searched
Hmm.
on secure coding, and said sort by the newest arrivals
Hmm.
ASP.NET Core 5, network programming with Go, Secure Code Warrior, secure and quality Java coding using Sensei. There's a lot of interesting books that were released just in the last couple of years. I'd look at some of the more recent ones from James Ma, Michael Murray,
Hmm.
Alice and Bob Secure Coding from Tanya Jenka. Yeah, that interests me. But I really like this book from Ma that just came out. And if you're a Python developer, I would totally get Michael Murray's book that was released just a couple months ago. He's been
Okay.
around in the secure coding world for a long time. That's Secure Python Coding Fundamentals. Looks really interesting.
Love it. So what we'll do is when we publish the episode, we'll tag all of these names so that
Awesome.
our audience can get benefit out of it. And that's a great way to end the episode. Also, thank you so much, Jim, for joining with us. It was a fun discussion.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's nice to meet you and nice to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Hope you have learned something new. If you have any questions around security, share those at scale20.com and we'll get those answered by an expert in the security space. See you in the next episode. Thank you.